I want to understand white rage, and I'm white, and I want to understand it.
We knew he had a screw loose. 2 months before Afghanistan, he's virtue signaling about white rage, white privilege. Something far more serious, though, far more serious that we just found out. So there's a new book out about the Trump administration. Now, it's by Bob Woodward, and I'm sometimes skeptical of him. And CNN, they're the only ones who have a copy. But it looks like General Milley may have engaged in something of a coup against President Trump, undermined his authority in huge ways. Now, this book, which will be available in about a week, and again, we're going off of their reporting, but this is what it says. 2 days after the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, President Trump's military advisor, General Mark Milley, single-handedly took secret action to limit Trump from potentially ordering military action or launching nuclear weapons, according to Peril, a new book by Bob Woodward. Now, Woodward and his co-author write that Milley was deeply shaken by January 6th, and he was certain that Trump had gone into a serious mental decline in the aftermath of the election, with Trump all but manic, screaming at officials and constructing his own alternate reality about the election results. So Milley, they report, took extraordinary action and called a secret meeting at the Pentagon on January 8th to review launch procedures. According to senior military officials in charge in the Pentagon's war room, Milley instructed them not to take orders from anyone unless he, General Mark Milley, was involved. No matter what you are told, you do the procedure, you do the process, and I'm part of that process, Milley told the officers, according to the book. He went around and got a verbal consent from everybody in the room. He considered that an oath. Now, he also talked with Nancy Pelosi during this time, and Nancy was hysterical. Oh, if President Trump couldn't stop the assault on the Capitol, what else is he capable of doing? And Milley says, Madam Speaker, I agree with you on everything. Now, Woodward himself and Costa, his co-author, write, Milley was overseeing the mobilization of America's national security state without the knowledge of the American people or the rest of the world. Woodward and Costa also write that some might contend, that Milley had overstepped his authority and taken extraordinary power for himself, although Milley himself thought he was acting in good faith. Milley, I don't believe, whatever his motivations, whatever he was telling himself, this sounds downright criminal. And well before January 6th, I had my eye on this guy. Now, do you remember when Donald Trump, in the middle of the Black Lives Matter summer, walked to the church across the street and held up that Bible? You remember that. We all saw it. Quite frankly, I thought it was a great moment. Now, the fake news, they were never so offended. How could a man walk in front of a church and just hold up a Bible like that after the grounds had been cleared of rioters who tried to burn down that church? The fake news was horrified, and apparently so was General Milley. Now, General Milley wasn't even part of the photo op, and that's what they dismissively call it, just a photo op. But he did walk across the street to the church with the president. This is one of the only pictures that exists. Well, as you know, General Milley kind of wet his pants about that whole thing and went on a weird, bizarre apology tour.
As many of you saw the result of the photograph of me at Lafayette Square last week, that sparked a national debate about the role of the military in civil society. I should not have been there. My presence in that moment and in that environment created a perception of the military involved in domestic politics.
It didn't really spark a national debate. It didn't. I don't know why he made that apology. I have my theory, though. He was signaling to the swamp, I'm with you. I'm not with President Trump. Because what does he do next? After he says we should never be involved in partisan politics, he dives right in to all the hot-button political issues of our time.
The protests that have ensued not only speak to his killing, but also to the centuries of injustice towards African Americans. What we are seeing is the long shadow of our original sin in Jamestown 401 years ago, liberated by the Civil War, but not equal in the eyes of the law until 100 years later in 1965. We are still struggling with racism, and we have much work to do.
This is a military man. What is he talking about George Floyd for in the protests? It's not his role. It's totally inappropriate and totally against, well, the apology that he just made for being so partisan. More.
Racism and discrimination, structural preferences, patterns of mistreatment, unspoken and unconscious bias have no place in America, and they have no place in our armed forces. We must, we can, and we will do better.
How does he propose to fight unspoken and unconscious bias, by the way? How's he going to tackle that one? Again, it's not his role. He should have been thinking about Afghanistan. There's more, and there's something very sinister coming, but there's more.
And we should all be proud that the vast majority of protests have been peaceful. Peaceful protest means that American freedom is working.
All right, I remember those protests. I lived through them. They weren't peaceful. They were riots. That was a horrible time. Why is he characterizing it as if he's a talking head on MSNBC? There's something not right about this guy.
The freedoms guaranteed to us in the Constitution allow people to demand change, just as the peaceful protesters are doing all across the country.
Lecturing us about what's in the Constitution. Peaceful protests, again, not peaceful. But here's where I think he's sending a signal, a subliminal signal almost, to the swamp, to Democrats, maybe even to Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Nancy. Take a look. Listen carefully. Look at his eyes.
All of us in uniform are willing to die for that idea, the idea that is America. And so we must also be willing to live for that idea, for freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom to peacefully assemble, and freedom to vote, and freedom to believe as you wish in your religion. These are essential freedoms that are the cornerstone of our country. Americans have spilled their blood to protect them in the past, and they continue to be worth fighting for. This we will defend.
This we will defend. If you're not listening carefully, you can say, oh, that sounds great. You're going to fight for all those freedoms, things like that. Those freedoms at that point are not substantially at risk domestically. January 6th is months away. What does he know? What is he getting at? What is he signaling? That we will fight for. Every time they try to bring in the National Guard to maintain order, the fake news and the establishment in the swamp all freaked out. What is he getting at? What is he signaling? I'm not sure, but I think we're getting a better idea. Again, it is a tragedy that he was not more focused on Afghanistan. We saw all this virtue signaling. He's having fun talking about George Floyd. Look at me, I get it, subconscious racism. But look at what he should have been worried about. This is what he should have been preventing. This was his job. Meanwhile, today, the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, on Capitol Hill. This time in person, at least. They didn't try to Zoom it. And, he's sticking to his talking points. But God bless Ted Cruz, Republican of Texas. He was amazing, and he said what had to be said.
Ever since the disaster began unfolding in Afghanistan, we've seen the Biden administration making political excuses. We've seen Democrats on this committee explaining at great length how everything that happened in Afghanistan is Trump's fault. It's all Trump's fault. Mr. Secretary, Joe Biden is the President of the United States. Kamala Harris is the Vice President of the United States. You are the United States Secretary of State. Just like Jimmy Carter owns the disaster of the Iran hostage crisis, you own this.
He does. Great. And Ted Cruz doesn't need notes, by the way. Nobody prepares questions for him. He just asks.
You keep saying things like the steps the Taliban needs to take to be welcomed into the community of civilized nations. Mr. Secretary, they don't want to be welcomed into the community of civilized nations. They are terrorists who want to murder us. This administration doesn't understand that. Joe Biden doesn't understand that.
And what a shame, huh? What a shame that they don't. More.
Abandoning the Bagram airfield, giving it to the Taliban. That is a decision that 100 years from now will be studied at war colleges as a colossal strategic mistake, giving up 2 secure airfields, necessitating an evacuation from a dense urban environment, a commercial airport, which led tragically to the suicide bombings and murders that killed 13 American servicemen and women.
People give him a hard time, but he's one of our finest legislators ever, and I hope one day he's president. More?
Leaving billions of dollars of American military equipment that the Taliban will now use to threaten our lives. Earlier in this hearing, you said about that equipment, quote, none of it poses a strategic threat to us or their neighbors. That does not pass the laugh test. When you're looking at the Taliban potentially having 64,000 machine guns, 33 Black Hawk helicopters, 16,000 night vision goggles, we will see American blood spilled because of these colossal mistakes.
It was an amazing performance. He said what had to be said. Blinken, meanwhile, just stood there and kind of took it, sticking to his talking points. We didn't learn anything new from him. But the disaster in Afghanistan, we have got to figure that out. We have got to prevent something like this from happening again. I don't know when we'll ever be in these circumstances again. Oh, there's something else. You may have heard about the strike at the Kabul airport just after they got our 13 soldiers. We responded, and well, here's the news back then when it happened.
Good morning, you two. We are learning of this explosion in a neighborhood near the Kabul airport. A Taliban spokesperson says a U.S. airstrike targeted a suicide bomber that wanted to hit the airport.
All right. Yes, there was a lot of news about that. And General Milley spoke in a particularly cryptic fashion, I thought. This is a bureaucrat warrior, to be sure.
At the time, and I think this is still valid, we had very good intelligence that ISIS-K was preparing a specific type vehicle at a specific type location. We monitored that through various means, and all of the engagement criteria were being met. We went through the same level of rigor that we've done for years, and we took a strike.
All right. There's something kind of odd in the way he's talking about this, and I'm not quite sure what it is, but making sure that we know that the processes have been, just kill the guy, what's up? More.
We know that there were secondary explosions. Because there were secondary explosions, there's a reasonable conclusion to be made that there was explosives in that vehicle. The third thing is we know from a variety of other means that at least one of those people that were killed was a ISIS facilitator. So were there others killed? Yes, there are others killed. Who they are, we don't know. We'll try to sort through all that. But we believe that the procedures at this point, I don't want to influence the outcome of an investigation, but at this point we think that the procedures were correctly followed and it was a righteous strike.
All right, so why is he being so cagey? They got the wrong guy. They got an innocent guy, and the fake news doesn't even care about it. The fake news has totally moved on. They got an aid worker who had a bunch of children, by the way. We have his picture, and we have the picture of his kids. This guy was an innocent. Joe Biden wanted to look tough, and they took out an innocent person. They took out an innocent person and their children, and nobody's talking about it. Isn't that interesting? Meanwhile, when Trump killed a genuine terror leader, Soleimani from Iran, who was at the Baghdad airport in Iraq, and they decided to take a strike, and it was amazing. This guy had been responsible for so much mayhem. The fake news lost their minds about this. Talk about a righteous strike. This was 1,000% justified, but they didn't like it.
Killing Soleimani would not have stopped an imminent attack any more than, I guess, killing Eisenhower would have stopped D-Day.
Is it safer today, or was it safer before Soleimani was killed? Just speaking today in terms of those Americans.
Yeah, it was safer before Soleimani was killed.
They don't defend Soleimani, but they also don't think that a president should be an imperial president. and just assassinate people whenever he damn well feels like it when there's not an imminent threat.
You can understand that Soleimani was a bad person.
Sure.
But you also can want the administration, or at least to hold them accountable, to give the evidence of how it was imminent, because you heard the president saying, well, we stopped him from doing some bad things. Well, where's the evidence of that?
Do you see how they try to trip him up on everything? They're not disputing that Soleimani was a bad guy and and they got the guy. They got the right guy. And look at what they give him. Brings me back to President Bush, George W. Bush. He is the new hero of the swamp. They're still swooning about that speech he gave in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. We played some of it last night. There's another portion that's really grinding my gears, shall we say.
Malign force seems at work in our common life that turns every disagreement into an argument, and every argument into a clash of cultures. So much of our politics has become a naked appeal to anger, fear, and resentment. That leaves us worried about our nation and our future together.
All right, this is the guy who invented, helped perfect wedge issues, culture war issues. His buddy, Karl Rove, they perfected this stuff, especially in 2004, when Iraq was going so poorly. What did they come up with? Divisive culture war issues like gay marriage. George W. Bush came up with the idea, never would happen, that he wanted a constitutional amendment to ban gay marriage. It was a wedge issue, a culture war issue that he made happen. This guy can be a downright dirty fighter when he's fighting for himself. Remember what happened between him and John McCain all the way back in the year 2000? McCain was on a roll. He won New Hampshire, and George W. Bush had to win South Carolina. So George W. Bush, just like his father, went down into the sewer when it suited him and tried to find dirt on John McCain.
Governor Bush had an event, and he paid for it, and stood next to a spokesman for a fringe veterans group. That fringe veteran said that John McCain had abandoned the veterans. Now, I don't know if you can understand this, George, but that really hurts. Yeah. That really hurts. You should be ashamed. Yeah, let me speak. You should be ashamed.
No. Is he responsible for what someone else says?
Well, this same man, he stood next to him. It was his event. This same man had attacked his father viciously.
Yeah, he did.
You should be ashamed of sponsoring an event with that man there who had attacked your own father.
I believe that you served our country nobly. And I've said it over and over again. That man wasn't speaking for me. He may have a dispute with you. Let me finish, please. Please.
He's listed as your
Let me finish.
So now that he's retired, now that, as he said, he's had all the fame and power that anybody can want, he can act like the elder statesman and diss Trump and diss all of us who support Trump and like what he stood for and liked how he fought, and he can protect the swamp. And that's his way back, basically, to, I don't know, rehabilitated status, all right? Because Iraq is his fault. He made it happen, no weapons of mass destruction, and it did nothing to make us safer. I just thought that Afghanistan would have ended better. It should have. It should have.
You just watched Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news channel, now in more than 70 million homes. You can get Newsmax TV on your cable system or check your cable guide. And if your system doesn't carry Newsmax, call them, tell them you want Newsmax TV, because we're real news for real people.